Welcome to the Diefenbunker's Cold War Speaker Series. This is our first event in this year's series where we hear lectures and talks given by guests on Cold War themes both within Canada and around the world. My name is Isabel Campbell, and I'm the curator here at the museum. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Isabel Campbell. Dr. Isabel Campbell is a senior historian at the Department of National Defense, an adjunct research professor in the history department at Carleton University, and a senior fellow at the Bill Graham Center for International History at the University of Toronto. She has published on Canada and the Cold War, alliance strategy, gender and service families, and the intersections between foreign policy and military history, as well as on the Royal Canadian Air Force, the Canadian Army, and the Royal Canadian Navy and archival matters. Dr. Campbell's talk this evening is titled Cold War Workers, Labor, Family, and Community in a Nuclear State. This talk presents stories and themes from the book Cold War Workers, edited by Dr. Campbell. Cold War Workers raises questions about the influence of settler colonial masculine institutional values on those who labored for the Cold War state and society. By comparing the experiences of different types of workers, families, and communities, this volume reveals how race, gender, and privilege affected people in varied and sometimes unexpected ways. Given the broad reach of Cold War history, it is a wonderful addition to the historiography to have these perspectives included and to learn how the Cold War affected groups not normally covered in the broad strokes discourse of the period. I would now like to welcome Dr. Isabel Campbell to the virtual podium. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sean, so much. I just want to say thank you to Sean Campbell, no relative, and also to the Diefenbunker for hosting this talk tonight. And I certainly want to thank everybody who's joining us. Lisa as well, the tech support person who's been just fantastic. So most of you know that the Diefenbunker has become a very vibrant place, and I'm very honored to be included with the other distinguished speakers. I know last term they had Asa McKercher and Susie Colburn, and this time they're having Kevin Spooner and Matt Wiseman, and I just feel very, very privileged to be part of that distinguished group. So as you know, tonight we're covering off this book, but I'm mainly going to be, I'll be summarizing some of the chapters, but I mainly want to talk about the contributors and what I think that they, the strengths and gifts that they've brought to us. Just before I get to that, I want to thank McGill Queen's University Press. Kyla Madden supported and encouraged this project from the very first day when my dear friend Kathleen Kearns introduced us. So thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Kyla. I also think I need to take a moment to thank the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, Awards to Scholarly Publishing, without whom we wouldn't have this book. And I know that the SSHRC, Social Sciences Humanities Research Council, also supported the doctoral research of several of the key contributors to this volume. You know, we owe a lot to that program. The RCIF Heritage Fund also came into play after the book was peer-reviewed and completed. And I think that timing is important because while I work for the Department of National Defense, and I'm very grateful for that employment in these precarious times, the department, this is not an official history. I'm not speaking on behalf of the department. I'm speaking here as an individual. Other financial information you might want to know is there's a 25% discount coupon available from McGill Queen's in case you wish to purchase the volume. Now, if you did already purchase the volume at full price, I have some information that might make you feel better about that. 100% of the author royalties have been directly assigned to the Assiniboia Residential School Legacy Group. And it was Murray Sinclair, who's Warren Sinclair's cousin, and Warren is indeed the author of the first chapter of this book. And Murray Sinclair made that recommendation. And those funds go directly. I don't donate them, they go directly from the publisher to them. And I think that's a really important thing that people realize, that the financial benefits go to those individuals who have shared their stories. And I think that's an important thing to do. So one of the themes in this book that is throughout is the role of silences. And throughout this talk, I'm going to take a moment here and there to remember someone. And right now, I hope you'll stop your jumping jacks or singing or whatever you're doing and just take a moment, deep breathe for a moment or two, and let's remember Murray and what he did for our country with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Thank you so much for that. So there's quite a linkage between Murray Sinclair and the Sinclair family and the first chapter. Here we have the author of the first chapter, Warren, who's the tall guy wearing the light shirt, and his dad, who has got all his military medals on, Elmer. The title of the first chapter is A Tale of Two Worlds, One an Open Book, and that, of course, refers to Elmer's military career. He was proud of his service all his life and spoke of it often. And the other was The Dark Secret, and that was the experiences of Elmer Sinclair in the Fort Alexander Indian Residential School. So I first met Warren in the 1990s when he joined the archives at the old Directorate of History, which is now the Directorate of History and Heritage. At the time, Warren spoke very proudly of his Indigenous heritage and his dad's army career in the Second World War in Korea. And he was among the first peacekeepers to go to the Middle East. And he also trained signalers in Kingston. So when I met Warren in the 1990s, he often spoke about his dad and his Indigenous heritage. But none of the Sinclair family at that point had any idea of what Elmer and his siblings, who you'll see here, had endured in residential schools. However, as Warren documents in his chapter, the historiography was just beginning to publicize those abuses. But it was in 2001 when another historian at the Directorate, John McFarlane, was interviewing Elmer, that he finally told this story, and he was quite an elderly man by this point, of the abuses he had suffered as a child. Now, John, I want to pay a little bit of tribute to him. I think it was his professionalism and his very gentle technique that did create an atmosphere for Elmer to speak. Now, Warren does wonder why didn't he tell his own family? And as he recounts it, in all likelihood, Elmer didn't wish to, transmit that trauma to his own family, but he did probably consider it his professional duty to speak out and help future generations understand what so many Indigenous people had suffered. Now, it was through Elmer's stories that Murray Sinclair, the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, finally learned what his dad, Henry, who's the younger brother of Elmer, and he's here in these pictures, he's one of the young ones, had suffered as a little boy. Because by that time, Henry, who also served in the military, had died. And in fact, all the Sinclair children, with the exception of Elmer, had passed away before they were able to talk about those experiences. Thus, Warren's chapter allows Canadians to learn more about this important part of our history and the Sinclair family's role in it. Elmer's residential school experience and his military training produced this very strong, silent, masculine performance, something that affected his family relationships in a powerful way. At this point, I want to just move and talk a little bit about Warren himself. So don't ever suppose that it was an easy path for Warren to write about this. I think it was, despite the big smile on his face, I think you can see in his eyes that there was a great deal of pain involved. And there's a much larger chapter with lots and lots of details. As you can see, Warren's done lots of work on Indigenous people, and there's a much larger chapter at the Directorate for people to read if they want, if they get curious. So we're just going to take another little moment here, and I want to thank I want us to spend a moment breathing and thinking a little bit about what Warren went through when he wrote this chapter, and also what those small children endured when they were just so very young. Thank you. So thanks very much. Now, Warren would never claim that the other family members agree with him. They don't. His siblings don't share all of his views. And he does not claim either that this is a representative experience. And throughout the book, one of the themes that you'll find is a diversity of experience that we respect. There's no intention that the first half of the book is Indigenous. There is no representative Indigenous experience during the Cold War. And that's certainly something that the authors are diverse in their experience and knowledge and what they bring to the table. Each of them has quite a different viewpoint, but we're all looking at labor. And so it's different aspects of Cold War labor. And looking at this residential school experience, which preceded the Cold War, it is also labor because those children indeed worked. So the other thing about this volume, and something that I think I'm very proud of, and I'm very proud of all my 6 contributors, is that right from the moment, even before peer review, people indicated that they felt that it read like a monograph. And one chapter leads to the next chapter, leads to the next chapter. And you can imagine that the contributors worked very hard on that, and that they very much cooperated and were kindly and generous to each other. And we worked slowly together to create that monograph type of flow. So leaving this chapter and moving to the next chapter, which is We Are Willing to Stand on Our Own 2 Feet, Cold War Moosonee, Adaptation to Change in the Closer of a Radar Station by Sue Heffernan. Now, as we've just heard about the Sinclair family, you can imagine how the people of Moosonee felt when they were able to educate their children in their own region, rather than sending them hundreds of kilometers away from their families. You can imagine how important that was to them and how important it was to their children. So in this chapter, Sue Heffernan does an analysis of the environmental impacts of the Pine Tree Station, race, gender, class, and military-civil relations. The map credit here goes to Leo Lavriviere. It's part of Sue's collection, but he worked at Laurentian University, and I think when you look at the doctoral research that Sue drew upon, you can see the influence not only of her lived experiences, her decades of experience as a planner for the Ontario government, her feminist and environmental activist background, her absolute determination to make sure that the people of Northern Ontario were heard, and that their voices were preserved. And I think it speaks very much to her dedication that she, after retirement, did her doctorate and drew on her long-term relationships with community leaders and Indigenous elders in this work. And so here we've got this lovely picture of Sue. I just love it, and you can get an idea of her tremendously vibrant spirit. And I want to take again a little moment that we can stop our singing and dancing or whatever it is you're doing in the background. And we'll want to thank Sue for the gifts that she's brought us in this book, and also the gifts of those who she interviewed and their willingness to share their experiences with us. Thank you. So you'll have to read the book to get the details. I'm obviously skimming over these pretty quickly. Now, this might be my favorite photograph, and I know Stacy has joined us from Alaska. And I think you get a feeling of the power of her research from this chapter. She invited me to co-author with her, and it was a great pleasure. It was very great pleasure I had working on this chapter. So it's called Voices from the Dew Line. Now, she drew from her anthropology doctoral dissertation, but Stacy also drew from her own lived experiences. She's a longtime Fairbanks resident and an applied anthropologist of Arctic infrastructure. She's run dog teams, and she now manages Alaska Adaptable Housing and works to advance sustainable housing for Northern residents. So her expert analysis draws upon 2 summers that she spent while she was doing her doctoral research. She sailed and paddled the Western Arctic, and she conducted interviews with elders in very remote communities, including many who had grown up as children on the Dew Line. So, for example, the book opens with quotes from Sammy Lenny, who talked of hours of free play and time with his brother, and lots of berries. And then also mentioned, the relative isolation and loneliness of his mother, who was removed from her community by his father's work on the Dew Line. Now, she interviewed many people, so we get a sense of some of the transformations and difficulties that were experienced. But as in the other chapters, one of the big themes here is that while the Dew Line is kind of a monolithic thing across the Canadian North and Alaska, the experiences of the individuals are very diversified. And as she points out, even within one site, you might find very different experiences. And certainly children would have experienced it quite differently from their adults. Now, many of the construction workers would have developed harmful addictions, and some lost important aspects of their culture. But after they lost their jobs, many of them and their children became activists for environmental cleanups and later for Indigenous businesses and jobs. And so I also wrote the introduction and conclusion, which I'm drawing on here. And in the conclusion of the book, you'll discover that it's an Indigenous-led, an Inuit-led company that now runs the maintenance for the Northern Line that has replaced the Dew Line. And I think those are important changes that we see. And so the theme, it's not like there's any sort of linear progressive line throughout this book. That doesn't exist. But what we see is interactions and activism, both within and outside these security institutions, that leads to some measures where communities can offset any of the harmful effects that they have. And I want to just very quickly mention Stephen High's research on deindustrialization in American-based colonies and the global militarization, which I think we all benefited from, and also Whitney Lacandauer's research and the other authors that he has worked with that have benefited us so very much in our work. Before we leave the Indigenous half of the volume. So if we can just take a second here, and again, we'll have a quiet moment to think about Stacy and thank her for her gifts, and also the gifts of those that she interviewed in teaching us about their life experiences. Okay, so as we depart that first half of the book and move on to the fourth chapter by Matt Wiseman, Overcoming Monotony, I think you can see the immediate segue from that chapter to this one. Matt's rigorous analysis of Cold War isolation research relates this scientific endeavor to labor requirements for the isolating conditions of the Northern radar lines. So as you can imagine, people would be sitting there in front of a radar screen, a very, very boring task. Now, Matt's chapter in a slightly revised version has been published in the Walrus, which I think, I'm very, very pleased about, and I think is a great tribute to Matt himself. He's an assistant professor on the teaching stream at the University of Waterloo, and he teaches many engineers. And isn't it wonderful that engineers are able to benefit from this sort of history that will help them understand more about kind of engineering technology and science and how it's been used in the past and some of the ethics around it. And he did his doctorate at Laurier, And I think much as the University of Alaska in Fairbanks and Laurentian informed the second and third chapters, Laurier and that institution also supported Matt, and I know that we all owe a debt of gratitude to those universities and what they brought to the table. Now, Matt has also authored Frontier Science and Silent Partners, both incredible books. And I also want to take a second just to talk about the kind of courage that I know Matt has displayed in his research. These are incredibly tough topics to study. Reading that first chapter in Frontier Science was really something that opens your eyes to aspects of science that are really, really quite difficult to study. And so much like with Holocaust research, this is research that requires compassion and intelligence and rigor. And I think that he's got that skill set. And I think that we very much benefited from that skill set. He's currently writing a book on military medicine in Canada and a second one on the history of women scientists in National Research Council. So again, I want to take a moment, and I hope we'll all take a couple of deep breaths and think about the gifts that Matt has brought to us, and also those people who were subjects and the scientists who worked, and indeed some of the tragic events that they faced during their lives. So thank you so much, Matt. Now, our next chapter by Frances Riley is the most common deviation, the problem of pathologizing homosexuality, and that's the medical term that was used at the time. I apologize for its use. Of course, people prefer the term gay, but we use it when we're looking at the research. Now, the fear of masculine weakness at the Toronto Forensic Clinic. And you could see here that sort of theme of this idea that science might solve all the problems of the world, this kind of optimistic viewpoint that we see in the early Cold War. So Riley focuses on nomenclature and especially specialist labels to police human behaviors and discourage the expressions of sexual practices outside of heterosexual marriages as a means of promoting a particular version of masculine labor. And of course, that would be, the fathers of that kind of Cold War nuclear family. So you can see how that fits in neatly after Matt's chapter. Now, Frances conducted her research. She did doctoral research entitled Controlling Contagion, Policing and Prescribing Sexual and Political Normalcy in Cold War Canada. And so it was this kind of fear of infiltration in the enemy. And when she looks at contagion, there's this idea that kind of like communism and gay behavior might kind of be caught like a disease. And it's a very exciting research that she's done. And she worked at the University of Saskatchewan. And again, I think you can see the influence of that academic institution on her thought. And I think we're all grateful for what she's, her other work that she's also produced. There's an excellent chapter in Dennis Molinaro's book, as well as this article on Canadian children's literature. And I think, children you'll see as a theme here that we've tried to include them in the history. And then she's also just produced this excellent graphic novel that I hope you'll have a chance to look at as well. So if we can take a moment and think about this medicalization and the kind of experimental treatments that this idea that gays were treated as though they were mentally ill. So I want to think about the suffering of those individuals and their experiences, and also of the physicians who were treating them, and beginning to understand and beginning to question some of the assumptions around that, as well as to thank Frances for the rigor and integrity that she brought to the subject. So we'll just be silent for a moment, please. Thank you so much, Frances. And Frances may be someone who's got an infant with her if she's been able to join us tonight. So her experience may not be as silent as ours, depending on whether her infant is napping or not. That our segue is now into this last chapter by Sarah Hogenberg, Constructing the Military Career Woman, 1950s and 1960s. And so here, again, we draw upon with this lovely photograph that is on the Library and Archives website, and that this is Sarah's analysis about how it reinforces gender hierarchies. So what we have here is a servicewoman who during the day would be wearing a uniform and performing very competently at some Cold War function. And in her off hours, this publicity photo presents her, I think, with this display of dominance, right? This smiling man who's probably also in the military is in the evening, they're out, and you can see he's kind of invading her space, and she looks a little bit uncomfortable here. And so the message, and there are many of these images that actually appeared in my Twitter feed during COVID without analysis. And I felt a little uncomfortable with the lack of an analysis. So I think we have to thank Sarah for the scholarship and strength that she brings to her analysis here. Because we just see images like this without some kind of analysis, we're not sure what the messaging is. And I think it's very important that we indicate that these are not behaviors that we're entirely comfortable with, and that we hope that these sort of images are no longer being promoted as a kind of normalized gender experience. And as someone who works at National Defense, I will say I am particularly grateful for Sarah's very excellent analysis here. I think she brings a lot of strength to the experience. Now, her chapter, of course, does a lot else. It talks about the need for women in this field. And the idea here is while women, the kind of gender relationship wouldn't change greatly, Sarah's path-breaking analysis draws upon feminist scholarship. So it doesn't contradict the work of Cynthia Enlow, who argued that service people and their families were supporting kind of a patriarchal, militarized society. But her careful analysis highlights how women advocated for a spot within the forces, and that ties to women's participation for political equality and also for greater equality within the workplace more generally. And it also supports Joan Sanctor's argument that feminism does not necessarily fit into neat waves. And further, I think it points to the arguments that feminism is and can be very different things. And I think it's very important to look at the diversity of feminist experience and look at now in the post-Cold War world, feminists are arguing that the women within security establishments will broaden and change definitions of security. So throughout this book, and I hope as you read it, you will see challenges to narrow definitions of security. Security is food. Security is being able to have your children educated in your own community. Security is a good house. Security is all these different things and not merely a weapon system. And I think that these are important things for us to consider. So as we finish up here, and I'm not completely done, I do want to stress, and I think Sarah's scholarship helps us see how there's activism within the forces as well as activism outside the forces that helps women gain equality over many, many years. And of course, the equality doesn't come till the very end of the Cold War. in looking at the larger framing. So let's take a second here and take another series of deep breaths and thank Sarah for the work that she did at Carleton. We want to thank Carleton for the academic institution it is, for the atmosphere and her advisors and their great advice and all the support that she received. And then we also thank every single woman who served in the Canadian Forces. I know every single one of them did an enormous amount to improve the place for everyone. And I think that they were improving it for men and women and others, whether they used those terms or not. So let's take a second and breathe and think about Sarah and the people she studied. So before I finish up, I do want to mention that Sarah is speaking at the Shannon Lectures. So if you wish, and you're in town at the Dominion Shaman Center on Monday evening, you may join her in person and hear her speak more about the post, that entire research that she's done, fighting for their place and recognition, Canadian servicewomen and workers in post-Second World War Canada. And you can also join virtually. If you Google Shannon Lectures, you will be able to join virtually at a distance, and I'm sure you'll enjoy her talk. Now, aside from her talk, next Monday night on October the 6th, Matt Wiseman will also be speaking, and his title is Cold War Consent, Military Experimentation and Research Ethics in Mid-Century Canada. So these are ways that, and I really want to thank my colleague, Jean-Michel Turcotte, who's our chief historian at the Directorate of History and Heritage. And again, we're very thankful to the Department of National Defense. These aren't official publications, and these aren't official talks, but we have been given this freedom to explore these topics and to share them with Canadians. And I think it speaks well. Not everybody in this globe has these kind of privileges to speak freely and to share our research with others. And so we're very grateful. We also have a talk, another one coming on October 20th, and these are outside the volume now. Brian Drowan, Jean-Michel has gotten him to speak on peacekeeping. And then we have John Moses, who will speak on residential schools on November 3rd. And again, I'm really looking forward to that. And finally, Lynn Golikier, who did serve in the forces and who is a Métis and who was a 16-year veteran who was forced out during the, I guess she survived the Purge campaign during the war on queers. And she is also a professor at Laurentian. So we look forward to those talks. And I hope that you will join them. And so I'm going to stop sharing the screen and turn things back to Sean Campbell.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell, for your presentation and for the overview that you've done on this fantastic volume. And highlighting the importance that Cold War history, a lot of people think of the military, political, and foreign policy aspects, but it's just as important to know about the social history, the labor history, and the gender history of the people who are participants in this period of time. And when I was going through, and I have many, many tabs flagging within the book of things that, were quotable in me thinking and preparing for this evening. I was thinking about the section in Francis Riley's chapter that was talking about the Polish philosopher of science, Ludwig Fleck, and how he wrote on social conditioning in the 1930s. And the sentence or the section that talked about stressing how science, which is a study commonly perceived as objective and universal, was structured by subjective views and assumptions, and spectators could not be separated from their patients. And when I thought about that that sentence and that idea or that perception of science, and I thought about the book and how everything put together, and I thought to myself, the theme that I recognize within this is that each, you know, that runs through it is that each is how people either fit the norm of Cold War society in Canada that was trying to be developed by the country, or they were experimented on to fit within the structures of the emerging Cold War world, and how it was this emerging frontier and trying to figure out how everybody fit within that society. And so it was interesting just thinking about that phrase and as I was going through. And again, I think it's important that that you've contributed indigenous to the indigenous LGBT community and women's Cold War perspectives through this compilation through the authors. Um, and the parts that spoke to me was the topics about scientific experimentation. I had known before about the Allen Memorial Institute and the work that they had been doing with the CIA, but I had no idea about the University of Manitoba. So learning more about the isolation research that was being done was eye-opening, as well as the studies for the Mid Canada line and radar defense from down south with the DRB's labs. Um, and then the most immediate one, because our museum for the past 2 years has been working to develop a platform about the history of the DEW line for Canadian high school students, going through the chapter about the lives of Western Arctic Inuit who were brought into this Western system with varied reactions with the construction of the DEW line. I thought it was very eye-opening, and it was good to hear in their own words how everybody engaged with this, with engaged with these sites and this part of that history. So it's an excellent, well-rounded history, and I think everybody should read it. It's great. I have a few thoughts I just wanted to bring up before we introduce questions from the audience. So, Dr. Campbell, what inspired you to approach the contributing authors to compile this edited volume now at this time?
Um, well, thank you for that question. And I'm grateful because you gave it to me ahead of time. So I could actually, I spent quite a bit of time thinking about that. And I think um, I think that the first kind of inspiration I had, because I think there were varied ones, and each person came in rather differently. But I think the very first one was Warren, and his talking about what his dad had gone through, and he was waiting for his dad to pass before he looked at the personnel file. That was something his dad and he had agreed that he would wait for his father to pass away. And I did hear his stories. And much like with the brigade book, I mean, that was a commissionaire who had served in the brigade. And then also our librarian had been a child with the brigade. And so the stories of the people around me kind of were on my mind. So when Warren began to work on that, I think it was at the back of my mind was there's something I could do to help, bring that to fruition. And while that was going on, and of course, Warren was working in the archives, Sue Heffernan was doing research for her doctorate. And at some point or other, I think it was one of the archivists put us in touch with each other. I was really fascinated by the pine tree line research that she was doing and doing oral history interviews and other things. And then as well, of course, Sarah was researching at the directorate. And I believe it was at the CHA, and I may be wrong on this, where I met Matt and heard him speak and was just, and Sue was there and Sarah's there. And so we began to talk. We had attended each other's sessions and we're just kind of just chatting about research. And I believe it was Sarah's idea that we could look at labor as a theme. I think she was the person who first mentioned that as a theme that we might use to bring things together. And then it was Kyla Madden who brought Frances Riley to my attention. She had met Frances at one of the CHAs, I think, or at a conference, and thought that her piece would fit in to that labor theme. And of course, she was right. And then it was also at the CHA, and it was at a panel organized by Whitney Lackenbauer And there were two Danish researchers presenting, and I had never heard of Stacy Fritz. I had never, and our library, as you know, much like the Diefenbunker, we've got a great library. We've got a great archives. I thought I knew a lot about, having worked for decades in the field. I thought I knew most of the stuff. And these Danish researchers were drawing on Stacy Fritz's research. And at that point, I thought I've got to get a hold of this dissertation. And so I got a hold of it. I read it. I was very impressed with the oral history. And I was also felt as though, we all know Whitney's work and it's excellent. And, he's kind of a god in the field. But here was this other person who had some things to offer and nobody knew. Or at least I didn't know, and I didn't feel like very many people had had the opportunity to read Stacy's work and become familiar with it. So I contacted her, and she was very, very, very busy. But she has, and I think that's partly why she invited me to co-author with her. But it's her research and her lived experiences that I think form the basis of this. So it was a great pleasure to work with her. And so that was kind of how the book came together.
Knowing the work that you've done extensively as an archivist and as a historian with a national defense, were you aware of these narratives prior to starting the compilation with the other contributors?
Only partly. I was the historian for the two class action suits. So I certainly was really familiar with the war on queers. I was certainly familiar with, and we had a fantastic librarian. I think she may be here. Elizabeth, thank you. She was so good at informing me, and our archivists were great at, if as a story, once I was an historian, if I didn't clue in, they would help me. So I did have a lot of help, and yet not only did I learn a lot from the six authors, the two peer reviewers, this is my chance to thank them, because with the introduction, we'd kind of thought we weren't going to do a lot of historiography, and the peer reviewers insisted on it, and they really gave me great suggestions. And I think it's a better book, a much better book, because of the peer review process. And that's not always the case. I think not everybody gets such helpful peer reviewers. They were very constructive and very encouraging. And so I don't know if they're present or not, but I hope that they will know that and I think the authors are very grateful for their commentary on the book.
And then, are there other histories that you've encountered in your work with DHH that, although not exact, would run in a similar vein to this research? Is there anything that you've encountered in your work as an archivist, but also within the field that you think speaks very closely, but has yet to be told or has yet to be presented with regards to this history?
Um, so I'm not exactly sure if I've understood your question. Do you mean unpublished history or something that was published that I thought was particularly inspirational?
We could do either or.
Okay, well, I do want then to take the time to talk about Laura Matacoro's The Dominion of Race, Rethinking Canada's International History. Because when I read that book, I felt like all the dominoes in my head moved. Literally every little piece of what I thought I understood about Canadian international history changed. And so it was a book that really, really, really made me think. And I'm still thinking about those findings. And of course, it's an edited book, but I thought, brilliantly brought together new analysis and new ways of looking at things that I'm still, pondering. Um, and then, some of the other books that I found really helpful would be Asa McKercher and Philip Van Huysen's Undiplomatic History. which, another fantastic and very recent book. And then the other ones was, Brittany Luby, The Damned, and and let me just get the other one up, which, I think that, oh, I almost forgot to mention Crystal Fraser, who's produced, and this is unpublished, so her doctoral research on the Inuit experiences in residential schools. And she also gave some good commentary on Warren's chapter and took her time to, comment on that. And so she's going to be a real star. And I think she already is kind of a star in terms of her doctorate, which won a big prize. So there should be, keep our eyes open for more stuff that comes out from her. So I think that covers off most of what you've asked. I'm sure there's just tons of other stuff I haven't mentioned and should have mentioned, but hopefully someone will ask a question and it'll pop into my mind.
My last question, before we turn to the group, what lessons do you want readers to have from reading through this edited volume?
Well, in terms of the way the authors worked together, they were compassionate, kindly, constructive. There was an absence of ego that I really appreciated in terms of, what they were willing to do for each other and their willingness to accept constructive suggestions. There was no point where people were got difficult. That just didn't happen. So the lesson there, I think, is that that is possible, and I'm very grateful. And I guess the other lesson is don't give up. This book took a long time. I, as an archivist for many years, didn't get an historical job easily. I do want to say that there's been precarious employment in this field the entire time I've been alive, but it's even more precarious now. And so I think people need to be aware of that, and be aware that that this is a really tough field for people to find jobs in, and hopefully there will be. I don't know, the humanities globally is in serious trouble. So I don't know if that's so much a lesson as an awareness that we can bring to the subject. And I think that history is really important. And it's really important for us to be compassionate and caring. This isn't a book, I hope that there's some difficult subjects, but I don't think it's that kind of experience where you end up outraged and angry. I think it makes us thoughtful and thinking about things in a thoughtful, calm way. And so that's certainly a lesson in our society that I hope we'll be engaging in respectful discussions and using silence to listen to others.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. So we'll turn to the audience for the question. What do you see for the future of this research and any new areas you'd like to learn more about?
Well, I think that's a great question, by the way. Thank you so much for it. I think one of the things I see happening at the Directorate is we've got some young new historians. I see a lot more women. And I also see, and it's interesting to see that in terms of others, that is those who are they, we're starting to see that among our co-op students now. And I think bringing in diverse, not just genders, but we're getting a greater diversity of people with different cultural and religious and different backgrounds. And I think that they will have insights I don't have. And I think it is just that simple. If you don't have diverse people contributing, you're not going to gain the same insights. So for the future, I think the future is, in fact, with the youth coming in and their new perspectives. And it's going to be up to people like me to really learn from that.
Oh, that's an interesting question about process. So curious as to how you managed to get an edited collection to flow like a monograph.
That is a great question. And I think it's partly that we didn't go in a rush. The other thing that we did was, and I'm so grateful to McGill Queens because when we first conceived of this book, one of the things I wanted was long chapters. And we wanted that because while I've been very grateful to have had the opportunity to participate as an author in edited collections, you normally have a very tight word count. And often it's very difficult if you've got a lot of new original stuff to get it in there because you have to, do a framing to explain the kind of context to someone who might be an undergraduate and not have a lot of expert knowledge. And by the time you do that, you don't have that much room left for really new stuff. So one of the things we had was, there's an introduction and then the 6 chapters and a conclusion. So those chapters are relatively long, and I think that helped. And it helped that people were able to really put in the framing, and that we did meet. We met at the CHA, and what an important forum the Canadian Historical Association provides for young scholars and older scholars to get together and talk about things. So we did have the opportunity to talk in person, as well as to read each other's work and make comments back and forth. But it was a and I'm so grateful to the patience, because some of my authors were ready early, right? They had chapters in fast, and then others, especially people were working full time. They were working on their nights and weekends during vacations, maybe at 2 a.m. So some people were, it took a little longer, and people were so patient. No one was going, well, I just withdraw my chapter, which they could have easily done. So the monograph part came with patient and lots of discussion and reading each other's stuff. I am going to say I'm really proud of that aspect of the book. It speaks to every single contributor and their willingness to work together.
Okay. And we also have a question from Dr. Andrew Birch. So what's your next project?
Oh, well, thanks for that, Andrew. It was a great pleasure, by the way, to work on Small Stories of War. That was a fun. Andrew edited that one with Christine Alexander and Barbara Lorenzowski, and I learned a lot working with that. So in terms of next projects, well, as you probably know, Andrew, I'm the team lead for the naval history, which is from 1945 to 68. So I have the great pleasure of working with Jason Delaney, who's now, I think, in Annapolis. He's just given a great paper on submarines. So a little bit more of the, Cold War aspects. Adam Coombs is doing the Argus, and Chris Perry is going to do Korea. We're also drawing on the excellent work of Mike Whitby, who has retired now, but has been a big contributor, as well as a number of other, there's a lot of people. John Clearwater has contributed to that. There's just a huge number of people who've been contributing to that. So we're now creating bulletins. The Directorate of History and Heritage will, classification is a big issue. So in order to get focused declassification, the submarine narrative will come out, the Argus narrative will come out, and then with the Oxford Handbook on Women in Intelligence, they've accepted my submission. I put in a summary of a chapter on RENs and women working in intelligence. So I'm really excited about that. And that is official work, because I will be looking at the Royal Canadian Navy in the Cold War and the contributions of men and women, because you can't just look at one. But I will be very much looking at kind of gender analysis and doing that. And then eventually, of course, we'll be doing the whole 45 to 68, which is a big task. But we're doing it we're taking chunks of it that we can get declassified and get published, so that people, the Canadians, are actually getting something from us. So I'm really pleased with that bulletin initiative that the Directorate now has. So those are the main things, those 2 main responsibilities as team lead and the RENS research. And then, of course, we'll be doing the entire thing. So the Royal Canadian Navy, as you probably know, did a huge number of tasks, and we'll hope to get to all of them.
It's fantastic. And we have, I think this will be our final question for this evening. And it seems to be one that in the 3 years that I've been doing the speaker series with the museum, it's one question that comes up a lot, and I'm always interested by the varied responses from the guests. Um, so looking into the future, as there are a number of Cold War-like issues and challenges, and based on your experience, archival and understanding this period of Canada's history, what particular lessons from the past do you feel that Canada has not yet learned from historical lessons?
Oh, okay. That's a really, really good question. Um, and what lessons has Canada not yet learned from the Cold War? Well, for me, the past isn't necessarily a crystal ball, right? It's not necessarily a crystal ball, but there's no question that we're dealing with an unstable globe. I mean, I don't think that that's a surprise to anyone that this is a very unstable world, just as it was during the Cold War. So, um, okay, there's another question that just popped up on my screen, but so just to get to that question, in terms of things we haven't yet learned, I think I, I, I think some of it is not overreacting. I think throughout the Cold War, Canada was relatively good in not overreacting. You know, if we look at those things, so I think not overreacting is something we're pretty good at, and we should continue to be good at. It's not really answering your question because I haven't had a chance to think about the things that we as a nation didn't learn. Right now, I will say I'm personally fairly pleased with what I see as better listening within my department. They are, in my opinion, much better at listening to others and being responsive to others and recognizing the strength that others bring to the table, better than they've ever been. Could they get better? Probably always, right? I think it's always the case when you've got extremists. It's no surprise that we do have some extremists. Perhaps we always have, but is that a lesson that we fail to learn? I don't think so. I think it's just something that we have to always be aware of and be aware of. If we listen to people carefully, uh, then they will feel heard, and we can talk about what the problems are, right? And I think that that's the approach that I hope that I'm kind of proud of. I think I'm proud of our country generally. I'm not proud of obviously what we did in residential schools. We've got a long way to go there, um, a long, long way to go. But I think we're on a path, and I hope I hope we'll continue to. If I can go back to the questioner, is there something specific that they think we haven't learned that they think I should address? As maybe they know something I don't. So I'll turn it back to the questioner too. Um, would they like to offer me a suggestion on something they think we should have learned?
Absolutely. And while we wait for a potential response, there's another one. Are there other aspects or topics you would have liked to have seen explored in the book as you were working with the authors to compile it?
Um, Yes, there were some people I asked, and I understand like edited books apparently, by the way that their catalog don't always get the kind of attention individually each author that some people would like to see. So there was an author doing research on military families that I invited. Who didn't want to take part, and I very much respect that decision. And I won't name them in case it's embarrassing, but certainly I would have liked to have seen that. I would have liked to have had a chapter on military families and children. I think that would have really been interesting to have that perspective.
Okay, so I believe that's all the questions that we have. Again, I want to thank Dr. Isabel Campbell, uh, Senior Historian at the Directorate of History and Heritage at the Department of National Defense, once again for their time with us this evening. Dr. Campbell, where can people go to follow you and your work?
Where can they follow me and my work? I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. Maybe those would be, and LinkedIn. So I think the social media is probably the best spot, but I'm also at the directorate, and certainly people can always contact me there as well.
All right, fantastic. Thank you again, Dr. Campbell. I highly recommend following up and reading Cold War Workers, Labor, Family, and Community in a Nuclear State. I have my copy here. It's all flagged up with the interesting bits that I did for research prior to the talk, and to learn more about the Canadian government's approach to Indigenous veterans and communities, career women in Canada's military, and the way scientific research and the medical community worked in the peak years of the Cold War in this country. So that concludes the event for this evening. I want to thank you all for attending this evening's talk, as well as our hopefully you come out for our upcoming sessions to learn a little bit more about the Cold War and how its past is still with us today. We will be returning on Thursday, October 16th for Dr. Matthew S. Wiseman's talk titled Duty or Opportunity: Canadian Scientists and Military Research in the Early Cold War, and on Thursday, November 20th with Dr. Kevin Spooner discussing Canada, Africa, and the Cold War. We look forward to seeing you at our next series event. Thank you and take care.